Hi.
Nice to meet you here.
Hey,
Yeah.
Yeah,
How's it going?
We just realized that you can do video on the stage now, so we were testing
So
it out.
tech.
Yeah.
I was unprepared. So just face art for me.
Okay.
yeah. Just a fair warning, we're going to record this, so I think I'm going to turn my video off too once we actually get going on that. Actually, probably now, just in case. But feel free to stay camera on. Welcome to the party. This is the house party.
Thank you for the invite to the party.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Lots of meta governance to talk about. Sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it looks like we got some people trickling in here. Maybe we'll just jump into it, huh? Should we start with some brief introductions from these weirdos gathered here on this dance stage, on this party stage? Deacon,
All
who
right.
are you? Who are you?
Hi, I'm Deacon or Deacon Bro on socials. Deacon Brown is my name. So yeah, not Anon, but yeah, been in the DAO space now for 3 or 4 years. Helped start Metacartel, Raid Guild, and DAO House, and been hacking on the Moloch kind of contracts. V3 DAO House is coming out. V3 Moloch contracts are out and audited, and so just a lot of fun. Been kind of doing community stuff, and mainly with Vin, who's been my partner in crime this whole time, along with another dude named Sam. But yeah, I guess Vin, I don't know. You have anything to add onto that?
Yeah, who are you, Van? Tell us
Yeah,
who you are.
not much more to add there, really. No, that's good. Pretty much all the same. We've self-organized a lot together, and try to help other people self-organize. But yeah, I'm a designer, mainly a graphic designer, but also just design thinker. And yeah, these days apply that mostly to coordination gaming, in DAOs and various forms of human self-organization. And meta governance is usually where I'm spending most of my days, thinking and either writing and doing diagrams, and sometimes hanging out with cool folks and talking about it.
Nice. And then today we're joined by Tara. Is it Tara or Tara?
Whatever you like.
Okay, I can alternate freely between the pronunciations of your name.
Yeah. No, I'm one of those. I have no preference for my name whatsoever. So whatever works for you.
Cool. And then who are you? Like, what's going on with you? We know who you are. We've actually been reading a lot of content around your various avenues of expertise all morning. But why don't you introduce yourself to our house party here?
Yeah, cool. So I'm currently doing a PhD. It's a very weird PhD topic because it's kind of like blockchain and DAO governance is the focus of it. Specifically, I look at exit to community. So essentially the idea of how do companies or cooperatives or foundations or something that's more centralized and like a legal entity, how does that transition into a DAO? And that DAO being kind of oriented according to a bunch of principles that Nathan Schneider did a lot of thinking around and people in that sort of space. And that's what I look at. And I look at it by doing ethnographic research, which sounds complicated, but is actually, or it just means you hang out with the communities and the people who are actually doing the thing rather than come up with some like big theory or model and test it on somebody. You kind of just like go there and try to understand and be with them, realize the context, realize all these unexpected, weird things that come up in between, document them and kind of inscribe them so other people can make more sense out of it, hopefully, going forward. And yeah, I do this work as part of a project called Blockchain Gov, which is headed by Primavera de Filippi, who's kind of been writing about all these things for quite a while from the academic perspective. I'm also an active contributor at MetaGov, which thinks a lot about meta-governance stuff. So hopefully we have something to talk about there. And through my work with MetaGov, it brought me to this really awesome community, which is called DADA, which is a bunch of artists, really, who created this platform where they draw together. And for them, drawing is conversation. So it's never about like putting out your masterpiece or anything of that. It's all about kind of, I'll put something there that I feel or on a particular topic or subject or whatever it is. And people can come in and reply, and you have these little kind of like horizontal films of paintings that emerge. And DADA is really interesting because DADA was one of the first projects or like one of the very early projects to get into NFTs, basically pre-ERC 721. They were the first ones who started to encode royalties for their artists. And they're also interesting because they have this very strange vision, which they call the invisible economy. They don't like financialized governance, and they're really skeptical of tokens and money in the art world. That's really their context as an artist community. But they want to be a DAO now. So they're kind of doing this exit to community, and I've been hanging out with them a lot over the past year in particular, and trying to figure out how to best do that beyond, to a certain extent, you could say like Moloch DAO style. So I think it's really cool to chat here today. And yeah, shout out to Christina, who's been with us quite a bit recently and invited me here.
Nice. Yeah, shout out to Christina for basically being one of the most lovely people I've ever met, and expertise in her coordination across communities here. Yeah, thanks. That was a really nice setup. All those topics hit really close to home for me personally.
Yeah, I could go for days.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot to talk about. I guess I forgot to introduce myself. My name is TW. My name's Travis. I actually dropped out of a PhD program to come into the DAO space. I was studying philosophy, aesthetics, and critical theory at the European Graduate School, and then pivoted to UX research and UI design, which is mostly what I do these days with organizations like DAO Haus and Raid Guild and maybe Metacartel and Moloch DAO sometimes. I'm really interested in the ethnographic research of DAOs. I consider, I might be incorrect in this, but I think ethnography is a kind of methodological practice that comes out of institutional anthropology. I think, thinking about an anthropology of DAOs is in itself a huge rabbit hole that I'd love to touch on. For us and for those of you in the audience, I kind of preloaded a bunch of links and references in the house party chat. There you will find all kinds of interesting stuff from MetaGov, including like a community rule book to help communities bootstrap. And I'm a big fan of the constitutions research that y'all did in collaboration with Versus. There's a really wonderful article about crypto political like kind of personas, thinking deeply about the variegated political space of the Web3 and DAO ecosystem, and also a full ethnographic report on the Proof of Humanity community, which I just stumbled upon this morning. And also this incredible blockchain socialist collab where you guys are strategically critiquing Balaji's network state. That I am really excited about that. Looks like you have 3 episodes in the queue already. That's how I'm going to be spending my weekend. So maybe we can start a little bit in discussing like this meta governance idea. This really is close to home for DAO Haus right now, as we're like kickstarting our own meta governance project. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can kind of wade around in those waters a little bit to start.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any like concrete questions, but maybe I can just say about MetaGov, like what it is and what it does, because it's kind of confusing, is my opinion. It's kind of a Slack group predominantly, which is weird in itself, but it's a Slack group of a bunch of people many of who are researchers in some sort of capacity, like not only academic, and really looking at all things governance. Like there's a bunch of people who are like planetary governance. There's people from the kind of DWeb communities, or I guess that precedes or is a little bit of a parallel thing to a lot of what is happening in crypto. So decentralized web, lots of peer-to-peer technologies. And then there's obviously also a lot of people in crypto are looking at what's going on there in terms of governance, and essentially trying to distill some core principles, trying to understand how to encode them in various technologies, I mean, governance is kind of about rules, processes, norms, right? What do we do with them? What can technology take care of? What's the other part that needs to remain human, that we need to just like sit on a call or sit together and discuss and figure out together, and we cannot automate? And trying to surface those and doing that in like a really interdisciplinary way and across many sort of projects, be it there's a DAO standards group, DAO Star, which I think is super interesting. The constitutional stuff, that's also something that like Blockchain Gov is doing a lot in right now, because that's a bunch of lawyers who want to understand governance in blockchain ecosystems. So they're like constitutions. There's some sort of document which is codified. It might be on chain, it might be in some sort of other area, but it's kind of like principles that we set out for ourselves, so that when things go really wrong, which was a little bit the ethnography in Proof of Humanity. I don't know if you've been following, but it's a DAO that is now forking, which is super interesting. And there was, for example, there was no constitution. So when people started disagreeing, there was like huge disagreement around what are the core principles of this project? Like, where are we even going with this? Why are we doing this? What matters? And these kinds of things. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everyone will be pleased to find the DAO House Constitution included within that research as well.
Oh yeah.
What do you find?
Go ahead, Vin. I was going to talk about DAO Stars, so you go ahead.
Oh yeah, okay. What do you see are like differences in what I see a lot of communities forming and discussing values, and sometimes they skip that stuff a lot and just kind of assume a lot of implicit values, and then at some point, sometimes there's like enough momentum to where somebody decides to, hey, let's try to write these down. Have you noticed or kind of noticed any like differences in communities that have like very explicit values written down as in a manifesto versus communities who don't?
I can say, maybe to stick with Proof of Humanity and DADA, something that I've noticed. So in Proof of Humanity, there was kind of this value almost of democracy that was just like going through a lot of their writing and their thinking and our engagement with the community. And it was always like brought up when also things didn't go so well. People would be like, but it's supposed to be democratic, therefore we need to do X. And the other people were saying, no, it's supposed to be democratic, but like a technical democracy, therefore we need to do the other thing. And so it was kind of like there was this explicit value or ideal of whatever democracy is, but it wasn't consistently defined throughout the community. And that's maybe something that ultimately contributed to some extent. Like there was a lot of factors, and I don't think it's a failure at all. I think it's an interesting evolution in DAOs and in that community particularly. But then if you take DADA, and this is what I think is interesting, it's kind of like, it's extremely tight-knit. I'm not sure if it's interesting as well, but like their governance model is all deliberation, which just means like people have endless discussions, or they feel endless, but they're actually kind of enriching, and everybody, it's like very wholesome. You enjoy it, like, I don't know, feel refreshed afterwards. But through all these discussions around various topics where the outcome isn't even the goal of it, you get to know everybody in the community quite well, or at least people are talking about the same thing. And you start to develop this like intuition or sense for what they mean when they say certain things. So DADA has like this datagram around their own values. I wouldn't call it a constitution, but it's kind of like what they orient themselves towards. And there's one part that is autonomy. So one of the values that's in that community is autonomy. And again, autonomy, I think, can mean so many different things to so many different people. But in the DADA context, like, it's very clear. And people know that, like, and everybody agrees for some reason. And that, I think, is a really interesting distinction and how that comes about. And for me, yeah, in DADA, it's really about people have to put in the work to get to know each other. And it's not hard work. It's something that they enjoy. Whereas in Proof of Humanity, we also saw a big split between like languages and Telegram chats, and it was quite fragmented. So there wasn't even that space to understand the value across the community, maybe.
Yeah, that's great. I have a couple of lines that really stood out to me in kind of getting up to date with some MetaGov and DADA stuff this morning. So from the MetaGov website, I like this definition of meta-governments. On the internet, the right to self-governance is not a natural right. It is enabled and circumscribed by the architecture of the platform on which the people interact. That same architecture also governs the interaction between separate user-generated institutions. So meta-governance describes these two related roles. One, enabling and constraining users' abilities to create their own institutions. And two, governing the interaction between separate institutions, whether they be small groups, large communities, or formal institutional structures. And I think that statement probably resonates deeply with the DAO House community and how we're building and empowering communities to summon their own DAOs and retain this kind of economic and governance autonomy. And then from the DADA papers as well, you guys have this really substantial, really incredible 12-part detailed article that kind of goes into the vision and the values and the ideology and the economics. And I really love how detailed the whole artist UBI modality is. And somewhere in there, I found, this definition of autonomy as defined as the ability to make informed and uncoerced decisions. So in the invisible economy, where art is separated from its market, autonomy means the freedom for people to self-direct and follow their own curiosity, hone their skills, experiment with each other, get feedback, have a community that values what they do, and realize their full potential. And I think that is just super powerful, incredibly powerful. Certainly, like a working definition of autonomy that would carry over into any number of decentralized experiments in community formation and decentralized governance beyond just artists. But as an artist myself, I'm particularly excited to see it be used in this way to kind of create that social safety net as a direct correlate to freedom, empowering individuals with the freedom to do, as you say, or as the article says, realize their full potential. That's a modality I'd really like to see picked up and replicated in more of these foundational community designs, personally.
Yeah, so what I think is really interesting, just to jump in also with the autonomy and that you resonate as an artist, I think the context here is so important. Also that the DADA community, they seem to all have the same understanding or converge on it largely, but also because they come from a context that is the art community and the idea of like, you get to choose what you want to create sort of thing as an artist. That's the important part about being in control of your own decision making. It's not somebody who commissions your pieces or whatever. But I think if you take autonomy out of the art community, it might mean something very different. And to understand that these contexts like matter deeply, and I guess that's also like my ethnography side talking, where the idea is like we can't just transfer everything and like plug and play everywhere. I think that's something interesting and something that's super relevant to DAOs because they're very different.
Yeah.
With that, the kind of, I guess, the mix between autonomy and deliberation, they almost feel like opposite sides of the spectrum in some way. And I guess in our experience, or to speak to some of my experiences inside of this DAO, we've had some times of like really heavy deliberation, and that would probably be around when we were writing our manifesto, or trying to come to decisions that seem to really impact everyone. And a lot of times that deliberation, I mean, gets to the point where it's almost too much, right? It's like, okay, we just can't come to a decision because it has to go back to another survey, or we have to circle back and get input from everyone, or and eventually it's someone takes the initiative just to like make something happen. And sometimes that gets pushed back because it's like, well, we haven't actually agreed on this decision. But with autonomy and inside of a DAO and with emergence and things, someone just doing it and taking that initiative and responsibility seems to kind of be the thing that can push any one thing into action. I think that deliberation is really important, but it also seems like it is a never-ending process sometimes. Have you guys seen that in Dadaism? Or in Dada?
I would want to just piggyback onto that. I would say in a concrete way, my experience is similar to what Deacon's describing. I've witnessed a few different things, but two really stand out. One is in that deliberative mode, like of a town hall style discourse with a bunch of people in the room. There is a bit of a power dynamic, a power struggle even, where only one voice can really speak at one time, and there is this tension of whatever the loudest voice in the room might be, either due to personality characteristics or due to some kind of like social gravity. Those are oftentimes the ideas that get the most, have the most bearing, have the most influence, and are typically passed, which is a problem for how we make that space for individual autonomy. Alternatively, I very often witness, to my horror, the recreation of bureaucratic structures, committees that basically steward a conversation, and there's a tension there in like the profound decentralization of every individual having a voice, to the sometimes momentary, but also oftentimes calcified kind of centralization into these bureaucratic bodies. And so, to riff off of what Deacon was asking, I'm really curious about how the DADA community handles these kinds of tensions. What is the deliberative process like? How do you all make decisions? And I mean, really, I'm curious, like, how is it working out? I heard that you guys don't make proposals or that you don't vote. Like, how is this working out for you?
So I think, like, to Deacon's point around, are these endless discussions? They seem like it, yeah, but it's the goal in DADA in that sense is not to be super efficient in the decision making. And I think this again depends on the context that you're operating in. In DADA, the idea of the invisible economy is kind of like to not give in to that sort of like outside push from we need to be super fast and super efficient exactly in our decision making, which either we do by making voting periods very short, by making proposal submissions very restricted, by having a hierarchy and that sort of thing. So if that's not the goal, then what happens is like you have conversations and they seem relatively endless, but they feel more like hanging out with friends. And every conversation that you have, but it's not about personal topics, right? It's about stuff that we do within DADA. But every conversation that we have, you kind of learn more about everybody's preference and where we're going. And the decisions, more or less, the way that it's hard to formalize. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And that's also something that makes it hard to technically implement. Therefore, I think in the DADA context, the technology and the tokens and all of that is more a supporting infrastructure for other things, but not decision making. Decision making is really these conversations. But at some point, if you've talked for such a long time, you kind of get what everybody's preference is, and you also get that somebody's not going to be that upset with a decision being made that's not 100% aligned with them. And then that's kind of just what everybody agrees on, and that's what gets done. So if somebody then goes ahead and does that, there's usually very little pushback. I wrote a little piece for them. We're still deliberating on it, but one of the things that I found, to me, as a metaphor that makes a lot of sense of how data decisions get made, it feels like a group of friends. And if it's somebody's birthday, for example, one of our shared friends, and we need to decide what to get that person, it's like, of course we could get my friend Mary tickets to a football match, right? But we know that Mary doesn't like football matches, so it seems absurd. Why would we do that? And then Mary's best friend will suggest something, and we know they know them the best, and everybody kind of just like implicitly agrees on that. So a lot of it is also to do with the idea that there is a very core group that knows each other very well and that has like extremely high levels of trust among each other. And that's the goal. And that's because having that trust and that knowledge of each other enables you to make a lot of decisions quite fast within this small group. And that's what moves data forward and what works and what is very different to other DAOs. The idea about keeping it open is that anybody can always come in and join these deliberations. But of course, without having been there for a long time, you're not going to understand the vibe immediately, and therefore will not be enabled that fast to make all these decisions or just go ahead and implement something, because then if you do that, there might be some pushback. But so that's kind of the idea. It's like a high trust DAO, or at least like blockchain community. And that's the goal.
So I think there's a lot of parallels with what we're going through right now here. We've been, over the last few years, we've been working as a group called WarCamp, which is the core developers and creators of the DAO Haus product and kind of community. But our kind of version of executive community, I guess, would be trying to open this up more. There's been a lot of feedback, but because of this solidified kind of core group, that we're not maybe representing the larger community as well as we could be, because it is so like in-group style. So the problem is the things that we do now that work really well, which is a lot of deliberation and kind of sense making in a small community, but opening up to a larger community and being not only very like transparent, but even open in our governance, those things aren't going to scale as well. At least that's our assumption. And so that's what we're struggling with a lot now, is like, how do we find these other ways to enable engagement by people that are more on the edges and not just this like in-group that's controlling everything.
Well, that ties in. I was thinking, the deliberation is just the tool of sense making, right? And for any group of autonomous individuals to organize and to interpret each other's consensus, it's really interesting for that to be done implicitly like that, and it happens in high trust environments, right? Because you can just kind of gauge each other's responses, and like you said, know if anybody's going to get pissed if you just run off and do this thing. You have a general idea of what the community thinks, and it's all about sense making, right? And deliberation is just like one method of that.
Yeah. What came to mind on that point too is there's this ongoing kind of, there seems to be some kind of gradient between trust and trustlessness and permissions and permissionlessness and various kinds of attack vectors that could arise in those tensions. So it seems like what DADA DAO or the DADA community, I think you said you guys are working towards the formation of a DAO. Maybe you don't have one actually summoned or in place yet. I'm unsure about that. But it seems like what the DADA community is cultivating is a preference towards that high trust. And I wonder how that, high trust, deliberative, conversational kinds of sense making, as Ben is saying, I wonder how that translates in terms of the permissions. On one hand, I get this sense that Dada is very open, very permeable, very porous, and that there's a place for anyone, any creative, to kind of take advantage of this cultural value and also economic value. But on the other hand, I would assume that deliberative processes would be slowed as the community expands, because trust is a time-intensive process. And so I'm imagining that there's a friction there. Like, I guess the simple question is, how permissioned is the Dada community? How permissionless does it strive to be? And, like, how has the community set those kinds of goals for itself, if at all? Because that's a hot topic for us right now in DAO House, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because obviously trust is like one of the most efficient ways to get stuff done, but it doesn't scale maybe that well. And so Dada doesn't have a DAO yet, but essentially a lot of this deliberation is around like how the DAO will be structured. And one of the core insights was like deliberation is still going to be one of the core decision-making sort of mechanisms, but maybe two things on how the Dada community deals with permissioning. The first one comes from this platform. So as I described in the beginning, Dada ultimately started as a place where people have conversations through drawings. And it is a non-crypto sort of thing. It started in 2014. And the thing always there was like you can start posting drawings and put stuff out, but you have to have been engaged for a little while and engage like posting, replying to other people, or like at least like being on the platform and active until you get the right to reply to other conversations. Exactly, and getting more involved with that sort of community feature. And then at some point, as you do that, you get the right to start your own conversations, et cetera, et cetera. So there was some sort of permissioning system, is what I'm trying to say, on this drawing platform. And the idea was never to, maximize the number of drawings or maximize the amount of users, although there's like 10,000 of users on there. It's like 18,000 people using the platform by now. So it's kind of huge. But the goal was always to maximize sort of engagement. So some of the things that we've been thinking about in terms of the DAO is, for example, it's not about posting the Discord link everywhere and getting like anybody to join. Like anybody who wants to join, engage a little bit. It's going to be at the end of every blog post. If you dig, you will find it. But there needs to be a little bit of interest. So I think there's some like initial sort of gauging to get people into the community, and then also to kind of, instead of saying everybody can get involved in all decisions, there's some smaller projects and initiatives, so it's not just one team making all the decisions on everything, but there's smaller initiatives. Like some people in Dada started this project Regrow, where they try to they have some physical gardens and they're trying to do community gardening and take CO2 out of the atmosphere and whatnot. And it's all people that draw on the platform. So around those projects, people can more easily get involved with decision making. But again, it's all about like getting to know those people, gaining the trust and the kind of intuition for each other, and therefore being able to effectively participate in deliberation. So yeah, I think there's the first thing. There are permissions. There is a goal of actually getting people who are committed and engaged, and spend the time of getting to know those people. I think that's also interesting in terms of security, actually, because if you think about a DAO like token voting, anywhere, there's always this risk. Oh, somebody can buy all the tokens. Submit a proposal. I'll transfer the treasury to myself and vote for it, right? And And within data, there's so much time and effort and energy that you have to spend. It's very costly to kind of game that decision-making system in the long run.
These
On
were
the
the
other
kinds
hand,
of attack vectors I was alluding to earlier. We think about that a lot too. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no. On the other hand, like scale, I mean, I think it's going to show in the future. I think it's a huge question. On the other hand, sometimes I'm not sure that in all DAOs, scale should be the ultimate sort of metric to strive towards, because I think they do pretty well for small local context, like local as you can get on the internet. And sticking with that is kind of amazing, in my opinion.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I'll even go so far as to say, fuck scale. We're like obsessed with it. It's like some old world traditional system preoccupations, and I don't think it should be like some kind of success metric in and of itself. I think there's something really important to tap into there.
Yeah, one part.
One thing I've thought about, or one thing I mean, we probably talked about it in the past too, but one, like scaling a DAO vibe or brand or community can happen by lots of localized smaller groups that all kind of adhere to that ethos, right? It's more about, in that case, decisions are being made on a more local level, but they're fitting underneath, say, something like a manifesto. Where in that case, it's not, the scaling is something different. I think there's different reasons to still scale, but yeah, I also agree, like, fuck scale. The cool thing about this stuff is these kind of hyper-local communities that are across borders in the whole world, which allows more trust. I don't know.
You heard it here first, folks. Deacon Brown says, fuck scale. We're going to get printed on t-shirts for East Denver.
Well, I think that the other Travis had the awesome talk about scale in December. But
the part I empathize with about scale is accessibility, right? Like, oh, we need to scale because, say a community is growing and everybody wants to join a certain community for some reason, even if they just like the vibe, and that's, so then you start to scale for accessibility reasons, right? Like, oh, well, everybody wants to hang out, like we should, try to scale to be accessible. But there's different ways to scale, right? Like, it's not like in the Raid Guild instance of like, not everybody needs to join Raid Guild. Another way to scale, they can still remain a very permissioned, curated group of, elite whatever. But they can provide protocols for other people to self-organize in the similar methods, right? And that's how you can scale. So it's just like sharing each other's protocols and knowledge and things like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
these are important points.
And I think like DAO Haus or like Moloch DAO frameworks are an interesting example of this. It's obviously huge and the most like widely used framework that I know of in this entire space, but it's just like an open source template and people are using it for all sorts of things. And does that mean, is that framework or that open source, is that a scale thing? I think maybe it is, but it doesn't mean that everybody necessarily always has to do the same thing, and it's very accessible. And how do we think about like these open source sort of frameworks and translate that thinking to other templates that we can kind of come up with for communities to function at scale without requiring everybody to be shouting at each other on like a Discord forum?
Yeah. I would love to I would love to pivot slightly away from scale and towards something maybe a little bit more risky of a conversation topic. I would be remiss, I think, if I let this conversation go by without addressing the name DADA, which is one of my favorite art movements ever. And so I think there's something here about lore, about the Moloch lore and how that informs the way that the Moloch contracts have been built, and maybe how the DADA community is associating to the art movement called DADA. I mean, for those that aren't familiar, we're talking like early 19-teens, 1913, 1911, something like that. This is like directly in the wake of World War I. Avant-garde artists in Europe escaped to neutral territories like Switzerland, set up like kind of clandestine underground meeting places. Like I'm sure you've heard of the Cabaret Voltaire, also very excellent band, by the way, look them up. And so like the Cabaret Voltaire became this kind of underground, decentralized think tank of artists revolting against the rationality, which caused the atrocities of World War I. So the values of Dada were irrational by definition. They were absurdist, and this is the movement that comes directly before and is actually concurrent with surrealism. So like these drawings that we see on the Dada community website are kind of indebted to this lineage of exquisite corpses, right? Where there is no individual, there's no single artist, but the artwork is like a manifestation of these entangled psyches, groups, collectives of artists. So I guess I'm just wondering, I know that's like kind of a convoluted, ranty thing I just laid out there, but I'm wondering, what's your perspective on this? Like how much of these absurdist or, blazingly irrational values do you see the Dada community upholding? And like, how do you feel about the Dada art movement and, this as like maybe an inspirational model for some of these governance schemes, or like, do you have any thoughts about any of that?
So I'm like an art appreciator, but not expert. But obviously, like Dada movement, I think is very exciting. From what I understand from that movement or how it relates to Dada, the project is definitely kind of this rejection of what would be the conventional norm, especially maybe in the crypto space. So that's why, like, for them, it's clear, like, no, we're not going to have proposals. We're not going to have voting, even if we have a DAO. Like, what else could it mean? Kind of like this, the radical, that's what they started with, the radical rejection of the art market. Like, what can we imagine beyond it? And doing that in kind of a fun and a little bit silly way. So that's what makes it very enjoyable. I don't think the art on the Dada platform is necessarily constrained in that way. But for example, I don't know, I guess the big collection that they brought out in 2017 was titled The Creeps and Weirdos, and it's all about being a little bit absurd in this digital art space back then and even today. And yeah, it's like, I guess maybe like as a community, pretty open to relatively wild ideas of what to do. And they'll listen and they'll probably say no if the argument is like everybody is doing that. They will be like, no, let's not do that. Let's think something else. So I think especially also as a governance researcher, this is the interesting part for me. But beyond that, yeah, I'm sure there's more to dig up, and I don't know about it.
Oh, there is. There's a lot of really great things in Dada that I think would be highly relevant to the contemporaneous Web3 community called Dada. Like I won't go off on a rant, I promise. I'll just say this. One of the most well-known artists is Kurt Schwitters, who is a collage assemblage artist way ahead of his time. He would create these incredible constructions inside of his apartment. There's a few that were created, and he called them his Merzbau, which I think is essentially it's a kind of ad hoc, improvised, collaged architecture that, like today we would call it an art installation. And I think that there's something about that improvisational nature that seems to be imbibed in the values of the Dada community. I mean, I think a lot with DAO Haus about how this community formed in Berlin. It was a Berlin hackathon, is that right? And it was like kind of started as a meme, like Bauhaus, and Bauhaus represents this kind of international style of standards, formal standards that can be transposed on various communities to kind of streamline elegant and beautiful construction, regardless of who you are, where you come from. I think these cultural histories are important to kind of uncover and make explicit and remind each other of.
I think it's kind of funny on that one because that was just like, whenever we were doing a hackathon, we tried to make it kind of something themed around wherever it was located, and that we were wanting to do something with DAOs, but we weren't sure what when we got there. Anyway, so it rhymed, right? Bauhaus and Dauhaus. But it's interesting because I think the theme in Bauhaus, or the style, the architectural style, all of that has bled into the community, even around like the kind of the simple designs and stuff that we try to strive for. I don't know. It wasn't an explicit, like, well thought out thing that we were going to do this. And even when I said, how about Bauhaus Dauhaus, I was thinking of the punk band. So, because I didn't know anything about the architectural movement. So,
dude, Deacon, you have like some war horns behind you. I'm just imagining like a Roman army like going through the streets.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry about
that. There was this one question I was going to ask you earlier when you were talking about your the project that you're working on for the PhD. It sounded like about exit to community. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then I think you said something about like something beyond a Moloch DAO or something. So are there like some properties that you're like desirous of there, or like some gaps that you're seeing in that process available?
Specifically to Moloch DAO, or?
When you said, well, like exit to community beyond a Moloch DAO, I guess, what do you mean by that? Beyond.
Right. I don't think it's beyond. It's like with and around and all of that with Moloch DAO. So my research, exit to community, is not like a Web3 native thing, but essentially the idea of going from a investor and founder-led startup to something that resembles more of like a cooperative, and especially doing that for like digital platform businesses or anything in the online space. And that could be done in various different ways. My research looks especially or particularly at DAOs, because I think that's like the one space where we're seeing it happen all the time, and where it's super weird that we all come from this like meta background that is crypto or whatever, and have an agreed upon implicit value that is decentralization for various reasons. And so we start doing it. And also what's interesting to see in the crypto space is that investors are backing that. These investors themselves could be DAOs, but also institutional investors from other places. So that's pretty unique. And that's what I look at. And I look at how that process unfolds. I try and ask, like, how do we know what's the right time to do it? Like, there's so many guides and how-tos and consultants that will tell you when your company is ready to IPO, but nobody knows when are you ready to turn into a DAO, and then what do you do? And I think that depends on various things, and then how you do it, and if that requires a Moloch DAO framework or something slightly different. It's really dependent on the context, and it's something that I want to figure out. So yeah, I will be I will be doing that for the next 2 years. Yeah.
Yeah, hell yeah, keep us posted. Great.
Yeah, what's that experience like trying to talk about these DAO Web3 crypto concepts within an institutional setting?
I think I've been extremely lucky because I'm in that research group. Like, my core research group is all people who are very heavily involved in the Web3 crypto space and have been for a while. So everything there is kind of like, is fine. And then if we go out to bigger conferences, we usually show up as a team and people are genuinely quite interested. The academics, I would say, like a lot of people obviously are skeptical. It's like a scam or it's the financialization of everything. I think it's helpful to get those critiques and engage with them. But so far, it's actually been good. And it's also surprising. So one thing that I'm working on at MetaGov at the moment as well, which we're going to launch in early April, is a project that we're calling Open Problems in DAO Science. And it started last year in April. So it's been exactly a year then, where we spoke to a bunch of like DAO operators and practitioners, and people were like, taxes, how do we do that? Like, how do we onboard people? What is a DAO? How do I know if I'm a contributor? Like, they had so many questions. And then we were all a bunch of researchers, and we're like, we know so many people researching DAOs. We should write something that kind of like highlights the need within these new types of organizations, as well as showcasing how researching them can, advance thinking in so many different fields, be it computer science or political science or economics. And so we're writing up a paper that tries to show like all of these different gaps that we've been seeing. And in that process, I've also like learned that there's just so many researchers from all sorts of different institutions that are already very interested in this phenomenon. So I don't feel as lonely.
Cool. It occurs to me too, like I want to ask the inverse question as well. Like, how has your academic work, how has your PhD dissertation content and that related research gone over within the Web3 crypto community? And I mean, well, I guess related to that, like, who is the ideal audience? Like, how do you find the differences of attention span and retention and things like that between the Web3 community and the institution that you're writing under or within?
So for me, another thing like that I'm super grateful for is that I feel the Web3 community, or everybody that I've come across, is actually kind of open to researchers. Also, as an ethnographer, it's a little bit like being a professional stalker or lurker. That's kind of like my thing, and nobody minds me being around. And a lot of people are very open to inviting me into their conversations, showing me around, that sort of thing. So I don't think that in a traditional corporate context, for example, that would necessarily be a given, but it's a little bit ingrained maybe also in this open source ethos that many operate on. So that hasn't been a problem. And then I think in terms of audience, it really depends on the individual. For myself, the only reason I'm doing this PhD is because I think, or I hope that ideally I'm doing something that is valuable to the DAO and crypto space. So I'm really hoping that ultimately that is my audience rather than pleasing some very institutionalized, old school academic people, although there is at times a lot to learn from them and their abstract thoughts.
Yeah, I think you are anticipating a thought that I was having as well, which is like, if the audience were to be the institution or the stewards of that institutional knowledge, then ostensibly it would be, I mean, to say the very least, I would imagine that some of these ideas would be quickly dismissed as like having like more strongly referenced historical precedents, whereas others might be considered like so radical as to be almost incomprehensible. I think the importance of this kind of research is to show that many of these kinds of ideas of autonomy, self-sovereignty, decentralization, et cetera, do have strong historical correlates and precedents and lineages. There's a kind of procession here. This is not stuff that's just coming out of, these aren't ideas that are just emerging spontaneously out of the ether in relation to the technology, but that the technology is, on the other hand, empowering some pretty dramatic moves over the last couple of years in this burgeoning DAO space. And that I think there's an exciting conversation in comparing our notes across the institutional or exstitutional bridge of like how some of these historical learnings might further empower our on the ground action here in the DAO space in a way that traditional institutions might not be capable of because of bureaucracy and because of, for a variety of reasons. I'm not so negative on institutions, don't get me wrong, but all I mean to say is that it's really exciting to think of these bodies, these epistemic bodies collaborating.
Yeah, totally. And I also think like for institutional academic researchers and whatnot, this is such an exciting space because, as you said, like the ideas aren't new, but there's so many people out there now with the tools and kind of like the willingness to pick up stuff. Like, I mean, a lot going on with like the Commons and like Ostrom research. Technically, whatever, like, consensus and peer-to-peer stuff, like advancing that. So people are picking up a lot of stuff that's been around for a while. Self-sovereign identity, whatever that is, or it should be in the future. And so it's really cool, I guess, also from an academic perspective, to see a lot of the theoretical discussions being kind of implemented and iterated and experimented on in this very fun sort of way. And I think, yeah, that a lot of academics should be honored.
Nice. Well, we only have about a minute left. Normally, we try to invite a bunch of these weirdos up on stage to hear their perspectives and comments and criticisms and things like that. But I guess we don't quite have time today. I would say when DADA community comes around to wanting to spin up that DAO, I know a pretty brilliant ragtag team of DAO enthusiasts that I'm sure could consult and collaborate in making that function in relation to the DADA community's ideals as best as possible. But that's only a slight tongue-in-cheek shill for DAO House. Do you guys have any closing remarks?
No, this was an awesome talk. Thank you so much for coming. I wanted to get into meta governance and kind of like DAOs, like the information being passed between DAOs and standards, and then also kind of governance about governance. But we'll have to save that for another day. Super interesting talk, and thank you so much for coming, Tara.
Yes. Yeah, thanks so much. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing all your experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Thanks for your time. It was a pleasure meeting you. Maybe we can talk more at ETH Denver if you're going to be there.
No, unfortunately, I won't be there this year, but let's talk more. And thanks again so much for inviting me. I was going to ask a bunch of things about the pluriverse sort of thing and writing lore and stories, because I think that's really interesting. And we'll definitely keep you guys, obviously, have you guys in mind for DAO spin-ups.
Sweet. Yeah, I think our DMs, at least these people here on stage, our DMs are always open, and we love to talk about governance stuff and lore crafting stuff and all the other weird sticky things, rage jelly type concepts that come out of the gooey cracks. So yeah, let's definitely keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I think we could do another one. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
See you.
Bye. Take care.